Okay, so today I'm going to talk about the Flow-Lenia system, which is work I've made when at INRIA Bordeaux, France, in collaboration with Google Research with Bert. So basically, this work is about an extension of the Lenia system, which I'm sure most of you know, which is basically a mass conservative extension of this system. And I will show like why this system is really interesting for when we're searching for the emergence of artificial life forms, and also how it can pave the way towards like open-ended evolution inside cellular automata. Okay, so first some background, quick background and motivation. Cellular automata, at least to me, have been always very fascinating because of the complex patterns that emerge, and especially what we call spatially localized patterns, that are patterns that are localized in space, and that can be reminiscent of natural life forms because they display some behaviors. And they also have this very interesting property of being autopoietic, or being self-produced. So the first and most common example of this kind of spatially localized pattern are Conway's Game of Life gliders. And recently, with the venue of continuous cellular automata, more complex forms of artificial life forms have emerged, especially with systems like Smooth Life or Lenia. So here we'll focus mainly on the Lenia system. So yeah, I will not go a lot into the details because I guess most of you know Lenia. But yeah, basically Lenia lead to the emergence of a lot of very complex and diverse spatially localized patterns with very different morphologies, with very different behaviors, interactions. Yes, some few examples of these kinds of behaviors. And so we can ask ourselves, like, how complex can these creators become? How complex their skills can be? Can they display some basic forms of cognition? And so this has been explored in this very interesting work where the authors basically trained the creators with gradient descent, diversity search, and curriculum learning to obtain creatures which are robust to perturbation, here obstacles. And very interestingly, we obtain creatures which are first very robust and with very strong sense of individuality, very strong individuation skills. But Lenia has some tricky properties that will be some limitations in the future if one wants to search for more complexity in this system. So first, a very large part of the parameter space of the Lenia system leads to exploding or vanishing patterns, which are not interesting to one that is searching for the emergence of spatially localized pattern or artificial life forms. Also, the parameter space displays very strong phase transitions. That is, you can have a spatially localized patterns. You just move a little bit in the parameter space and you obtain like either no patterns or exploding patterns. And another maybe more deep limitation of the Lenia system is that one set of parameters corresponds to one type of creatures. There is no possibility to have multiple different creatures coexisting in the same world and interacting, which can hinder the possibility to obtain evolutionary dynamics inside Lenia. And so we ask ourselves, okay, so what are the properties of these spatially localized patterns? Is that they express the property of being mass conservative. All the creatures we are interested in somehow maintain their mass. And so we thought that, okay, and what if this property was intrinsic to the system? All the creatures could display this conservation of mass. And so that's where we came up with the Flow-Lenia system. So, first, a quick overview of how Lenia works. So you have a set of activation at some time step, which is not in A. You are going to compute an update grid noted U with a set of kernels and growth functions, which are parametric functions. And then you are just going to add these updates to your current state and obtain your new state. So very simple system. And so to obtain mass conservation in our system, we use a trick is that we are going to express the dynamic of the cellular automata in terms of a flow in the CA space, in terms of a vector field on this space. So basically we are going to compute and update the exact same way we did with Lenia, with a set of kernels and growth functions, exact same way. And then we are going to compute a flow in this space by simply combining the gradient of this update, what we call the affinity map, which is going to basically capture the fact that the matter that is on each cell is going to flow towards higher affinity regions. And we are also going to add a negative concentration gradient, just acting as a diffusion term and avoiding to get all the mass concentrated in very small regions of the space. And then when we have this flow, we can move the matter around using a method called reintegration tracking. I will not go into the detail. We can discuss maybe later if someone is interested. Okay, so some random patterns in Flow-Lenia. So first, what we can observe is that all the patterns conserve their mass. The mass is always constant. They are almost all spatially localized. We have a grid diversity. Here are very random, not cherry-picked patterns. Quite good diversity. We have static and dynamic patterns. So quite interesting to see this kind of complexity from random search only. Here are a few cherry-picked patterns of Flow-Lenia. What is to note here is that the complexity we can see only from random search is quite impressive because, for example, it's very difficult to have such complex patterns in Lenia from random search. You have to search with some intelligent, smart strategies. So yeah, some few examples of these very complex how to predict creatures, moving ones, the snake-like patterns we can see on the top right, which is a very common pattern in Lenia. And on the bottom right are what we call multi-channel creatures. They are composed of multiple components. And we can see that they can display division and also fusion behaviors. We can also play with some hyperparameters of this system. So basically, we're going to play with something we call the temperature, which basically dictates how much random motion there is at the low level of the system. So the level of Brownian motion. And when playing with this temperature, we can see like this very interesting phase transition when we go from very ordered state to completely chaotic equilibrium state and going through a critical state in the middle. In this system, we can also, like in Lenia, evolve and train this creature to display some specific behaviors. In this work, we use evolutionary strategies. And what is worth noting is that we use quite small resources. Here we use OpenAI evolutionary strategy with population of only 16 individuals, which is very, very, very low. And we can see that nevertheless, we are able to find very good solutions to all of our tasks. From left to right and top to bottom, we have the directed motion, the angular motion, robustness to perturbation, and the gradient climbing task. What is to note here is that in Lenia, it will be very, very hard, much harder to obtain such creatures because you have to use very much more developed algorithm because you always have to track the existential status of your creatures if they are not exploding or whatever. Here the spatially localizedness being ensured, you don't have to, and you can just very simply evolve the creatures. Okay, so now we have shown that, okay, the Flow-Lenia system display quite interesting emergent creatures. Our question is now, okay, can we somehow develop a system where these creatures could intrinsically evolve? And by intrinsic evolution, I mean that no selection is put from the experimenter. Everything is intrinsic to the system. So the basic elements we will need to do that will be diversity. We'll need multiple species with transmissible properties in which the evolutionary process can act. And we need intrinsic selective pressures to actually bootstrap the evolutionary process and stuff. Okay, so how do we do multi-species simulations? I will not go into the details here, but basically, since we move matter, we can attach information to this matter in the form of like genomes that define how they are going to compute their affinity map, and so the behavior of the emergent properties of the emerging creatures. So here you can see a few creatures. The color is a coding for the genome. And you can see that they can display quite various shapes, even though they are in the same CA world. And more interestingly, we can run large-scale simulation of such system, where we put a lot of these creatures and we simulate it for some time. Okay, just a few details. So we have quite a big grid, 144 creatures. Okay, it's quite. Okay, it's nicer in life. But yeah, we can see that the emergence of real evolutionary dynamics, where we have creatures that somehow take over the large part of the world, and yeah, and also the emergence of very interesting multi-parameter creatures, some form of symbiotic things, where we have large creatures composed of one set of parameters that create a membrane and another that stay inside. So yeah, very interesting dynamics emerging from these systems. And the other thing we can do to have intrinsic selective pressure is to have a notion of resource constraints. So basically here, the blue squares are food. All the creatures see their mass constantly decaying at some fixed rate. And in order to grow new mass, they need to eat food, very simple. And we can see the emergence of very interesting behavior. I really love this one because it's quite static at the beginning, but then its mass is decaying and there is a phase transition, and then it's going to eat food. So some very primitive form of adaptive thing. And we also have a self-replication triggered by the consumption of food on the other side, which is a very crucial pattern to obtain if one is interested in intrinsic evolution. So yeah, so in summary, we propose like this Flow-Lenia system, which is a new kind of self-organized system. We are seeing that it can lead to the emergence of artificial creatures with quite complex behaviors, and these creatures also very easily trainable. And more importantly, we show that this system allows for multi-species simulation and multi-species simulation where creatures can be constrained by the need of resources, which will pave the way towards intrinsic open-ended evolution. So some future works, since these creatures are easily trainable, it will be quite interesting to see if we can find creatures with more complex cognitive capabilities. I don't know, like memory or problem solving. I don't know, decision making. Very simple. Of course, something I really want to do is to launch very large-scale simulation on the very long run and analyze these things. However, a very big question, open question here is, what do we look at? Very hard to analyze this system because there is no notion of individuals. Everything is emerging, so, okay. So yeah, very open question. And we already started working on some new extension of applying these flow components. For example, here is a try to adding the flow component to just a neural cellular automata. And so it will be a more general thing to have the flow and whatever cellular automata you want. So thank you for your attention.